We got vermouth! I love vermouth. And back in Boston, I started learning about vermouths. I started going to different shops, trying different ones, trying the half bottles, the sweet ones, the dry ones, Italian ones, Spanish ones. Excited to be able to move to Italy and get to try all the vermouths out there, go to the heart place of vermouth, where vermouth was first created, and I really thought, wow, I'm going to be able to go out with some friends, and we're all going to have vermouth cocktails. All the vermouth will be super fresh, and it'll be vermouth paradise. That's not exactly how it went. I got here, and there's a lot of cool wines, a lot of very fun stuff, but there wasn't all that vermouth. And I remember we went to Torino, and I went, oh my God, we're going to Torino. We're going to the city that created vermouth. We're going to Piemonte, the epicenter of vermouth. And there wasn't really that much vermouth there. And I realized it wasn't anymore the thing that you would just be getting it by itself, that you'd be just getting it on the rocks, that you'd be just getting vermouth and soda water, which is happening a lot in Spain. And in a weird way, the trend of cocktails, of craft cocktails and mixology coming all the way and coming back to Italy in a sense, has put Italian bartenders falling in love again with vermouth. And now I'm really starting to see the classic cocktails coming up again, and seeing also different brands out there having bartenders offer me, they say, oh, but have you tried this one? And people getting really excited about it. We get to this, Mancino Vermouth. This one's really tasty. I was actually selling it in Boston at the store I worked at, and I remember being like, this is one of the best, this is super good. And I come to Italy, and it was not so easy to find, actually. Because the bigger vermouth brands really have not a stranglehold, I would say, but they really have their place. They're really strong heritage brands. And this is sort of a kind of a newer label, more also boutique on the block, has done really great inroads in the cocktail world abroad. But now I'm starting to see also Italian bartenders and even Italian wine shops having this vermouth and other selections of really good vermouth as well. Now, vermouth tends to come in two categories, two main categories, of course. You have red, which tends to be a little bit sweeter, and then you'd have your white vermouth that's really good for martinis and those types of drinks, which this one is, which is called Secco. But there's also a Bianco vermouth, which is white vermouth as well, that has a little bit higher sweetness as well. I love the Bianco vermouths, especially for making cocktails with, because I think that a little bit of that extra sweetness helps really work with the alcohols that have a really high alcohol base, so especially like mezcals and gins, I think works really well. But the Secco is just really classic, and it's really great on the rocks by itself. And this with a splash of soda water is fantastic. And the other day what we were doing, and a super easy cocktail, no measurements required. It was just Mancino Secco, ice, and then just a dash of Amaro that we had infused with strawberries. It was exceptional. It was super, super good. And there's no wrong way to do it. You pour a little bit extra Amaro, you put a little bit less of vermouth, a little bit extra vermouth. It always works. Vermouth is a wine. Vermouth is a fortified wine with things, botanicals, herbs, spices that are added. But it is still very much a wine, so you cannot take your vermouth and put it up on your bar cart and forget about it. And that's one thing that you have to be very careful about, is sometimes people will try a vermouth at a bar. Maybe they'll try a gin martini, and they're getting a bottle of vermouth that's been there for who knows how long, at room temperature, maybe warm. Sometimes there's a fly in there. And it's gross. It's not the way to treat vermouth, which is such a beautiful product. You would never drink a Merlot or a Sauvignon Blanc that's been left, uncapped, opened, reclosed, and poured 10, 12, 15 different times for how many years even? For months? For decades? I don't know. But that's not what you want to get. You want to have a fresh bottle. And yes, it is fortified. Yes, it will last longer than a Sauvignon Blanc. Putting it in the fridge and closing it up, it can last a couple of weeks even. But really, it's just like a bottle of wine that once you open it, you've already sealed its fate. You need to be consuming it in full in the short term. Just like wine, vermouth has regional traditions. And not only was vermouth really started in Piemonte, but most of the brands that have made vermouth in Italy and continue to this day to make it are based in Piemonte, especially around Asti, where Mancino is based. A lot of vermouth brands back in the day were some of the first brands in Italy to really commercialize wine products. So they would be making the Americano, not the cocktail but the product. They'd be making vermouth, and they'd be making bubbly wine, a lot of spumante, long before Franciacorta and Prosecco were really very known. In Piemonte, you had a very big tradition of these big sparkling wine houses. But what really sets vermouth apart from wine is that not all the ingredients come from the region where it's made. Now, the obvious one, of course, is all the spices and botanicals that are put into it. Because, of course, you're getting things that are being imported, and let alone they're not necessarily things that are quote-unquote fresh either, because they're dried spices. They don't need to be, by definition. But another is the base wine itself. Now, a lot of vermouth is probably not using the best wine out there in the world. Mancino specifically, they're quite clear on where they get it. In this case, they're using a Trebbiano from Romagna. So not even from Piemonte. They're actually using white wine, Trebbiano, that comes from Romagna, in the Emilia-Romagna part. But that's actually very traditional. A lot of the Trebbiano that's grown in Romagna has traditionally been used and exported out for sparkling wine made in other regions. So even Prosecco used to buy Trebbiano from Romagna to make sparkling wine. The vermouth brands in Piemonte would traditionally buy tons of Trebbiano to make their base wines for vermouth and other products. And a lot of Trebbiano is also then distilled to make things and brandies and stuff like that that's maybe made outside of the Emilia-Romagna. So in ways it's actually very traditional that it's not from Piemonte, the base wine specifically. This Mancino Vermouth Secco specifically has 19 botanicals, so 19 things that are going in there, plus of course your base wine of Trebbiano, plus of course some alcohol to fortify it, and then still some sugar to actually balance it all out. All the spices or botanicals are things that you obviously have, that you probably have in your own home, like nutmeg, lemongrass, and sage. Then there's things like lemongrass, which sounds pretty nice, but not so common. And then things like dog rose, which I'm not even really sure what that is. Lastly, I really love using vermouth for spritz. So not always using a Campari or Aperol or Select or those products like that, but actually using a vermouth with sparkling wine or with still wine. And actually, spritzes were traditionally like that. The spritz was never solely Aperol or solely with that type of drink. But actually, in the writings that you can find from Veneto region, where people would traditionally drink like that, they would mix the still wines, and people would say, "Okay, give me half vermouth, half spritz." With vermouth, also has a nice effect because it really gives this perlage look. You can see kind of the syrupiness kind of go through it, and so if you kind of serve it nicely, serve it freshly like that, it's a really great way to surprise a guest, surprise a friend. And it tastes really well because the base wine that you're putting in, like a Prosecco or a sparkling wine, really will then kind of open up those profumo, open up the smells and aromas that the vermouth has so much. Burn out and have a good quarantine aperitivo.